There's something many women quietly worry about when they're trying to conceive. They hear that stress affects fertility, and then they start stressing about being stressed. And then suddenly the question becomes, if I'm anxious, am I hurting my chances? If I can't relax, am I making this worse? If that sounds familiar, well, you're not alone. And today we're going to untangle this because the relationship between stress and fertility is often, unfortunately, misunderstood, and that misunderstanding creates more pressure than clarity. By the end of this episode, you'll understand what stress actually does in the body and how to think about regulating it in a way that supports your fertility instead of pressuring it. Hi, I'm Batya. I'm a fertility specialist, strategist, Chinese medicine practitioner, and midwife. I work with women who are trying to conceive, especially when everything looks normal but something feels off. And here, we don't force the body. We learn to understand what it's responding to. So let's start here. Stress does not usually stop fertility because you had a hard week, or because you cried this month, or because you sometimes feel anxious about trying to conceive. Human beings are designed to experience stress. What influences fertility is not momentary emotion. It's how the body processes prolonged load over time. And that's not a personality flaw. It's physiology. What does stress actually do? Well, when the brain perceives sustained strain from emotional pressure, but also from sleep disruption or blood sugar instability or inflammation or even overexertion, well, it shifts priorities. And what the body does instead is divert energy toward maintaining the blood sugar or regulating inflammation or supporting the immune defense or managing cortisol rhythms. And then reproduction, which requires an enormous biological investment. It takes a lot of energy to build a baby. Well, that can quietly move into the background. It's not because the body is failing. It's actually because the body is doing something very intelligent. It is allocating its resources. And remember, it's always survival before reproduction. And this distinction matters. Let me give you an example. A woman came to see me shortly after a miscarriage. She had a 2-year-old at home and she was determined to do everything right and get pregnant again as quickly as possible. She was conscientious, meticulous, disciplined. She was charting and she was analyzing her chart almost obsessively. She kept saying, I'm doing everything right, and she was. Her nutrition was solid. Her supplements were appropriate, and she was tracking her ovulation carefully. But her physiology wasn't stable. Ovulation timing shifted slightly from month to month, and her temperature at the beginning of the cycle was up and down, and this variability suggested nervous system tension. Her sleep was also a bit inconsistent. Subjectively, she felt anxious. And clinically, her body was in vigilance, and this makes sense. After all, she had just suffered a loss, and her body still needed time to recover. It wasn't dramatic stress or collapse, just persistent, quiet activation for a woman whose body needed to recover and for a woman who was generally a bit on edge. And that together is enough to soften reproductive signaling. We didn't just tell her, relax, because in truth, that doesn't work anyway. What we did was change the signals that her body was receiving. And here are 3 ways I like to think about calming the stress signaling. One is learning how to send clear signals of safety. Before the brain can increase its reproductive signaling, it looks for stability. Safety isn't a mindset. It's actually a biological consistency. So we focused on consistent sleep timing, predictable eating patterns, stabilizing blood sugar, reducing late night stimulation, including scrolling on the cell phone. And I did give her targeted herbal support. The goal wasn't necessarily eliminating stress, but it was sending predictability. The hypothalamus doesn't respond to intention. It responds to perceived stability. And when stability improves, well, then signaling improves, including reproductive signaling. The second lever that I like to use when dealing with stress is supporting real recovery. Many high-functioning women are excellent at output, but poor at recovery. They're really good at activating the sympathetic nervous system. That's the part of us that helps us push forward. But they're not always as good at winding down and allowing their body to shift into parasympathetic mode, which is rest and digest. Because reproduction happens in parasympathetic mode. Rest and digest include reproduction. So if your body spends most of its time in subtle sympathetic activation, even if you're functioning well, reproductive signaling can soften. So we built for her structured wind down time. I taught her how to meditate, and we protected her recovery windows in her schedule. Her emotions still fluctuated, but her physiology stabilized, and that's the key. Fertility responds to regulation, not emotional perfection. And finally, we have a slightly counterintuitive lever that focuses on discharge. Here's what really surprised her. She had stopped her running regimen because she thought that exercise might be too stressful for someone trying to conceive, because after all, it does produce a cortisol spike. But her stress wasn't coming from excess movement. It was coming from unprocessed sympathetic activation. Some nervous systems regulate themselves through stillness, but for others, they need rhythmic, vigorous movement to help them discharge and help them regulate. So for her, reintroducing structured, non-competitive running helped her discharge excess sympathetic activation. Her sleep improved, her ovulation timing stabilized, her temperature patterns smoothed out. Not because exercise is universally good or bad, but because stress regulation is person-specific, and blanket advice can sometimes fail. Over the next few months, her ovulation timing improved, her cycle became more predictable, and within 4 months, she conceived. Nothing about her was broken. Her system simply needed time and help shifting from vigilance to regulation. I want to say this clearly. You do not need to become perfectly calm in order to conceive. Fertility does not require emotional perfection. It responds to physiological regulation. So instead of asking, am I too stressed? Instead ask, what signals is my body receiving repeatedly, and are they signaling to my body safety or vigilance? That question shifts you out of self-blame and into strategy. Stress doesn't break fertility. Chronic instability disrupts signaling, and signaling can be supported. If you'd like a grounded place to begin supporting the systems that most influence fertility, things like energy, blood flow, hormones, and nervous system regulation, I created a short guide called The 5 Fertility Secrets Your Body Wants You to Know. It's linked below and gives you a clear starting point. In the next episode, we're going to look at a phrase that feels reassuring and yet often leaves women more confused. That's everything looks normal. We'll unpack what unexplained infertility really means, why I really don't believe there is such a thing as unexplained infertility, because often what appears unexplained is simply unseen. For now, your body isn't broken, your symptoms aren't random, and fertility doesn't respond to pressure, it responds to support. Take this as an invitation to listen more gently, more compassionately, and more purposefully. Your body is